Hi there, I'm Vincent Boss and I provide dating and self-improvement advice. And in today's podcast, we're going to be discussing dumper mindset explained. So before we get into the podcast, I just want to let you know about my website, dateme.tips. That's www.dateme.tips. Do you need help trying to save your crumbling relationship? Would you like advice on how to try and get your ex back? Or maybe you need an action plan on how to try and get a girlfriend or boyfriend. I provide email coaching on all of these subjects and can help your specific situation. Visit my website dateme.tips to find out more details. That's www.dateme.tips. You will also find on my site the books that I've written, my clothing range, and other information. Please check your spam and junk folders if you are expecting an email from me. So now let's get back into today's podcast, and today we are discussing dumper mindset explained. So dumpies often wonder how a dumper feels over time and why some of them get back with their ex and others don't. As someone who has been a dumper in the past, I'm going to tell you about two of my experiences in today's podcast. So I'm going to be discussing two different times where I decided to end a relationship and what happened kind of going forward from that point through my mindset and how I felt about the other person and what ultimately happened. So firstly, we're going to go into a relationship that I had many years ago, and it was a long distance relationship. We had met online and via online dating, and we was meeting each other probably 6 or 7 times a year, and that went on for a few years. And the problem was, as I'm sure you can understand and respect, is that it wasn't really moving forward. You see, it was 6 or 7 times a year for a few years, and if you're in a long distance relationship, you eventually do need to close that gap. Long distance relationships won't last forever. You know, to have a proper relationship, you need to really be living with each other at some point. And this just didn't seem to be the case in this instance for me, because I was very happy living in my area and they was very happy living in their area. And it just kind of moved along like at its own kind of pace, and then got stuck at a certain stage. You know, we got to this moment where we was meeting kind of every couple of months or so, and we just didn't really seem to be able to decide upon closing that gap. Now, bearing in mind that at this point in my life, I wasn't a relationship coach. I didn't really fully understand things as well as I do now. But I did know that I wanted to close the gap. I did know that I wanted to come to some type of, agreement moving forward. I didn't know whether we could kind of decide to move halfway possibly. I certainly didn't want to go all the way where they lived, and they didn't really want to move at all from where they lived. So it ended up with me deciding to dump them. I ended the relationship. I did do it respectfully, but, in essence, I did dump them. And of course, if you're listening to this podcast, you're wondering about the mindset of a dumper. So when I ended that relationship, I was feeling very down at the time. I didn't want to do it, deep down, I did not want to end that relationship. However, I knew it was going nowhere. And because it wasn't going anywhere, I just knew that I kind of had to do it. But what's interesting is that they, in essence, did the no contact rule on me. They went into no contact. Now, I don't know whether they had taken any kind of advice at that stage, or whether it was just through their own intuition or their own kind of respect. But once I ended the relationship, I never heard from them. There was no begging, there was no pleading, there was just nothing. And it was interesting, especially now I look back, because I remember how my feelings changed over time. Because although I didn't want to end the relationship, I was very resolute in my thoughts that this was the right thing to do. But I definitely remember feeling, as kind of the weeks and months tick by, I started to really wonder about them more and more and more, and started to miss them, started to miss their communication, started to almost kind of get a little bit jealous, wondering about if they was with somebody else now. And it must have been 8-9 months later, I actually reached out to them. I sent them a message and they replied, and we actually got back into contact again. And it was fascinating now. It's fascinating now when I look back, because I realise exactly what was going on there. You know, it was a situation where they had applied the no contact rule, in essence, and it worked on me. You know, it pulled on my heartstrings, it pulled on my intrigue. I started to miss them. You know, I went through kind of like the grass is greener syndrome, you might say. I was thinking, you know, I'm going to meet somebody else locally, but it didn't happen at the time. And all of a sudden I reached out to them and they replied, and we did have some more conversations. Now, ultimately, we decided that it wasn't to be, mainly because we was both not willing to budge in where we was living. But the point is, but I reached out to them. Okay, so if you're wondering about the mindset of a dumper, in this particular instance, I can vouch for the dumper mindset changing over time. I missed them from the start in the respect of, you know, I didn't want to end a relationship, so I always knew that I was going to kind of miss them. But what I didn't account for was how much I was going to miss them. What I didn't account for was I was not going to find somebody as easily locally. And when I realised the grass wasn't greener, when they didn't bombard me with messages, they didn't beg, they didn't plead, they didn't reason, I just got nothing. Once I got that from them, once I got radio silence, it pulled on me and pulled on me and pulled on me. And 8-9 months later, I reached out, you know, and that just shows how it can change from being very resolute, thinking this is the right thing to do. The right thing to do is not to contact them, is to end the relationship, is just to cut all ties. And 8-9 months later, I'd moved to the point where I was pretty desperate to hear from them again. You know, I just wanted to hear from them again. I wanted to contact them. I wanted to see if there was a way around this. And I do think that jealousy based on nothing, you know, I didn't know what they was doing, and I was feeling jealous about that. That all pulled on me, on those heartstrings, to make me eventually reach out. So at this point, I just want to mention my weekly wingman service. I can be your wingman for the week, providing you with bespoke motivational encouragement. This can be to help with your love life, as well as ingraining a self-improvement mindset. The course begins with an audio call for us to speak, and then moves on to emails. For more details on this service, please click the link in the description. So now let's get into example number 2, to a different type of relationship that I had, in which I was the dumper. So in this relationship, I decided to end it because of different life goals. So the crux of the matter in this relationship was that they didn't want to have children, and I wanted that possibility of having children. So we had different life goals, which were really huge. You know, they were deal breakers. She was 100% I don't want children, and I was 100% I want that possibility. You know, I want to get to know you as we grow years into the relationship, kind of see how we feel. And I just didn't want to rule it out at an early-ish stage. So after a few months of being together, I decided to end the relationship. And this was a completely different instance to the first example, because they kept contacting me. They kept begging, they kept pleading, they kept reasoning, trying to use the reason that we was good for each other, that we was great for each other, except for this one little thing. But this one little thing was huge. You know, life goals can be huge, and especially when it's regarding children. You know, it's a massive thing. So, as I said, you know, I decided to end the relationship. I was respectful in how I did it. it wasn't a cruel breakup. I spoke everything through with them. But when it ended, instead of giving me the space, instead of respecting my decision, I kept getting contact, I kept getting missed calls, I kept getting messages, and they was kind of begging me, asking me to change my mind, saying that we can get through this, even though they was never going to change their mind, just kind of ignoring my feelings on the concept. And it got to the stage where eventually I blocked them. And I blocked them because I just didn't want to have to take this continuous bombardment of begging, pleading, arguing with me. You know, one moment it was like a very kind of kind message, but in a begging kind of way. And then it moved on to angry messages, you know, being angry with me. And it was constant. And at the end of the day, nobody deserves to receive that type of contact. So I did the only thing I could do, which was block them. I blocked them. I deleted their contact details. And even though now I look back and I think, you know what, they wasn't that bad a person deep down, you know, I don't have their contact details anymore. I mean, I'm in a relationship now anyway, so I wouldn't want to contact them. Additionally, I know that we didn't have the correct life goal match anyway, but I do look back on them with fond memories, other than the way they was bombarding me, but that is generally to do with the fading effect bias. And the fading effect bias is the concept that negative feelings fade faster than positive feelings. So the longer you go past an event, i.e. in this instance my relationship with this person, you know, the negative feelings fade quicker and you are left with the more positive feelings. So when I look back on that relationship, I look back on it kind of fondly, but then I do have to remind myself of the fact that when it ended, she was very kind of emotionally unstable. She was quite aggressive with me in her messages, and I hope she's well now. You know, I hope she's found happiness. I did say at the time to her that I suggested that, you know, she went and saw a counsellor if she couldn't stop bombarding me with abuse, because it went from her pleading in a nice-ish kind of way, but still, you know, as a dumper, that is very frustrating to receive, and then kind of move into very argumentative, very horrible messages, and it was just too much to take. So I hope she's well now. I hope she's found happiness, but she did need to kind of sort out some of her emotional difficulties that she was having. And even with the fading effect bias, you know, I can remember those moments, but it's interesting now I know how the fading effect bias works, and the fact that I look back on that relationship with more kind of fondness than anything, it does show that it's definitely a concept which is real. So I hope you've enjoyed today's podcast. I hope you have seen these two examples I've given, and I've tried to explain my mindset when I was a dumper, and let you know that dumpers' mindsets will change over time, but you need to, as a dumpee, give them that space. You know, you need to implement the no contact rule. You need to implement what I believe to be the best version of a no contact rule, which is my own slight variation on it. So you need to subscribe to my podcasts so that you can familiarize yourself with my version of a no contact rule and my ideas of how you can try to get your ex back if you are a dumpee. Because if you do everything right, then you stand an excellent chance of one day hearing from them again. But if you do everything wrong, then you will quite possibly and quite probably actually end up being blocked.